psychoanalyst, and architect. She is the immediate past president of IAAP and has graciously and efficaciously finished her office. She runs her practice at Allerød, Denmark. She is a member of the Danish Society of Analytical Psychology, the DSAP, and a training and supervising analyst at C.J. Jung Institute at Copenhagen. Let me warmly welcome Ms. Berg to charm us through her lecture. Over to you, Ms. Berg.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And welcome to all of you. Thank you very much. I will now share my presentation. Here we are. I hope you can see it. I would like to say that this presentation is partly based on an article that I have just published in the Journal of Analytical Psychology in this September issue. So some of this article is taken from there, but there's also other material. There's also material in the article that is not in this presentation. So it's a little bit different, but the subject is the same. It has to do with the myth of Ragnarok and reflections on polarization and destructive forces. That is my aim. So let us start. Let me see here. First, as an introduction, when Leonard Bernstein in 1989 in Berlin, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, with musicians from both Eastern and Western Europe, conducted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony with a magnificent Ode an die Freude, Ode to Joy, renamed for the occasion by Bernstein to Ode to Freedom. Many of us were filled with hope for a better world where the two sides of the previous Cold War could now start a fruitful cooperation. The Soviet Union had dissolved, and countries around Russia that had been annexed by the Soviet Union regained their independence. Also, Yugoslavia dissolved, sadly in a bloody war that cast a dark shadow over Europe. But at the same time, the countries in the two previously separated blocs started to cooperate, and many of us still felt relatively optimistic. Oh, sorry, the other way. However, from the start of the new millennium, the separating polarization between countries started to grow again, now also including the countries in the Middle East. A number of events were caused by and also reinforced this polarization. The 9/11 attacks and the invasion of Afghanistan also in 2001, and the Iraq War in 2003. Later came the global financial crisis in 2008, the war in Syria in 2011, following the Arab Spring, and Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. The number of refugees, just see if I can change this here to be, anyway. The number of refugees and migrants fleeing to Europe from these hotspots and other conflicted and impoverished areas of the globe has steadily increased since the start of the 21st century. In many European countries, this has driven a growing polarization between tolerant parties that broadly welcome the newcomers on the one hand, and a steadily increasing bloc of anti-immigration parties at the other end of the political spectrum. In late 2019, the COVID pandemic emerged and turned a totally unprepared world upside down. We all faced radical threats to our existence and were continuously forced to adapt to new ways of functioning, of protecting ourselves, and of thinking about what was happening and what we could do. In many countries, the pandemic reinforced the splitting and polarizing trends. A highly emotional polarization between vaccine supporters and anti-vaxxers emerged. That still seems to be quite on on the agenda still. But now it is almost as if it never existed, the pandemic. Our anxiety, our isolated lives, our deprivation from close family members, the terrifying images of military vehicles transporting corpses through the streets of Italy, or the images of mass graves in Brazil and New York, and many other terrible events seem now to have been forgotten. We have resumed our own lives, even with more spending, more flights, etc. And then, just when we thought it was all over, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and a terrible war that, when I write this, is still ongoing with massive destruction and very heavy losses. And now another terrible war has been added, the war in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, with equally dreadful and heartless destruction. The recent US presidential election has rocked the world, and as I write this, it is hard to see what will come out of all the chaos created by the new US administration. Every day has new stories that fill the news media that you almost doubt you dare to believe. But at the same time, most likely much more dangerous, not least because of its seemingly slower progress. We have a seriously growing climate crisis that, despite the fact that its impact could very quickly become much more pervasive, is still far too ignored or denied. I have now been in the IP administration for 15 years. I ended here, as mentioned, by the end of August. And the last 6 years have been very different from the previous 9 years. They have required actions and reflections far beyond our normal procedures and our normal understandings. However, within our Jungian community, the attempts to understand and contain the different crises have been massive. We have collectively responded with personal and theoretical reflections, activism, financial support, change of habits and working styles, change of rules and regulations, etc. The number of conferences, books, and articles on the global crisis show the immense resources and creative potential among our Jungian colleagues. Now I would like to make my personal contribution and reflect on what might lie behind the separating polarization. But first, a disclaimer. While I have done my best during my time in the IP's administration to be as inclusive as possible, I admit that my Eurocentric roots influence the way I understand the world. Of course, this goes hand in hand with the collective Eurocentric roots of our Jungian family, but I would still like to apologize to my colleagues in other parts of the world if they should feel ignored. So now I want to go to the Nordic myth cycle of Ragnarok. When I was a child, my father read to me from Wilhelm Gunbeck's Nordic Myths and Legends, an old book filled with fantastic tales about the Norse gods and heroes. This is not the picture of that book. It's not another book. The book was published in 1927 and in 1947. And Grønbæk was a Danish cultural historian who reworked an Old Norse textbook written in Iceland during the early 13th century, known as the Edda. And that is the picture shown, the Edda. It was written by a man called Snorri Sturluson, who lived in Iceland at that time, and it's probably from 1220. It's a little bit discussed, but it seems to be from 1220. And I have read. There is now a very new collection it's now a full collection of the Edda that has been published in Danish in 2012. I'm not sure it's published in English, but it's published. So I have read it in Danish and translated it. But yes, and yeah. Now I want to and Grønbæk wrote these to bring the tales alive for a 20th century audience. So Once I could read myself, I spent many hours immersed in stories of Odin and Thor, the Fenrir wolf, the Midgard serpent, and other fabled characters populating the mythical world described in the Edda. Therefore, I start my account of the Ragnarok cycle by quoting Grønbæk's opening lines about the creation of the world. In ancient days, before there was any earth or sky, nor any sea that washed up around a shore, there lay in the center of the world a monstrous gorge, and that gorge was called Ginnungagap. To the north stood ancestor of the giants. The living drops also created the cow Audhumla, and while giving milk to Ymir, who had already bred a large number of giants, she licked the salty stones, and within 3 days a big and strong man, Buri, was created. He became the ancestor of Odin, Vile, and Ve, the first gods. When the gods had grown up, they killed Ymir, and the blood flowed from him in such great streams that all but 2 of the giants drowned. The 2 giants bred a new race of giants, and they are the ones that still roam the world. The gods threw Ymir's body in Ginnungagap and created the earth from his body. His blood became sea and elves, his flesh became soil, his bone mountains, the teeth and bone fragments became stone and gravel, and the gods let the waters out until they flowed in a ring around the earth. They lifted Ymir's skull up above the earth and created from it the firmament. Ymir's brain floats under the sky, which is why the clouds are as cold as grim as giant swords. But the gods took all the sparks that flew from Muspelheim and placed them in the sky so they could send light to the earth. And they determined the orbits of all celestial bodies and thus determined the changes of the days and of the years. This is how the earth was placed in the middle of the wild sea. On the far shore of the sea, the gods gave the giants a home, but in the center of the earth they surrounded a land, Midgard, with Ymir's eyelashes. One day the 3 of them walked along, that was Odin, Vile, and Ve. They walked along the beach where they found 2 logs, and they formed them into human form and named the man Ask and the woman Embla. The 2 humans became the ancestors of the families that still live in Midgard. When the gods had placed the humans in Midgard, they established a home for themselves in the middle and named it Asgard. Yggdrasil. In the middle of Asgard stands the ash tree Yggdrasil. It is the sacred place of the gods where they meet every day. Yggdrasil's branches spread across the world and reach up over the sky. It has 3 roots. One root is with the Aesir, one with the frost trolls, who live where Ginnungagap was before, and the 3rd root stretches across Niflheim. The tree is constantly threatened with destruction. Deer eat its leaves, the trunk begins to rot, and the serpent Nidhogg gnaws at its roots. You can see the serpent there at the bottom. It eats the roots. One day the tree will collapse, marking the end of the world, Ragnarok. The Aesir and the Vanir. Asgard is home to two families of gods, the battle-ready Aesir, led by Odin, and the Vanir, who are associated with fertility, wisdom, love, peace, and prosperity. The Aesir represent military strength and political authority, while the Vanir take care of natural forces, wind, fire, rain, and sunshine, and thus the earth's crops. In the beginning, there was a long and hard power struggle between the Aesir and the Vanir, ending in complete reconciliation and therefore balance. The main gods among the Vanir, Njord and his two children, Frey and Freya, settled in Asgard and contributes to the perfection of the gods' power by adding fertility, peace, and wealth to the Aesir's legal power, magic, and military strength. You can see here down here. This is Odin. This is the part of the battle where Odin throws his spear towards the Vanir. And here we have Njord. He's the father of Frey and Freya. And Freya, you can see she's driving a carriage, and in front of the carriage she has two cats. And now the gods in Asgard. Odin is the greatest and oldest of the Aesir, and father of all gods. For 9 nights he hung wounded with spears on the tree Yggdrasil, and those won the runes which gave him secret knowledge and the gift of poetry. He can change shape into different animals and can contact the dead. He has given his one eye to Mima's fountain below Yggdrasil's roots, and thus he has one eye in the underworld and can explore what is hidden. And he also has 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin. It's called Sword and Memory. They fly out every morning, and in the evening they come back and tell Odin what has happened in the world. One of them can look in the past, and one of them can look in the future. And actually, I would like to add here, because we had this very good lecture by Erik Soring this morning, that this is Odin was also had the 9 nights wounded. He hung on the Yggdrasil, and he also had a shamanistic initiation, which gave him an extra wisdom. Now he was the one who could read the runes, and also the shape shifting is also part of shamanism. So he has a lot of shamanistic traits, Odin. And Thor is the most famous and the strongest of all gods and humans. He's the one here on the right. He has 3 valuable treasures: a hammer called Mjolnir, which has crushed many skulls, a belt that doubles his strength when he fastens it, and a pair of iron gloves which he uses together with a hammer. He's here riding through the sky in his chariot drawn by the billy goats Tantnasta and Tantnisnir. There he has these 2 goats, and they are producing thunder and lightning and he's producing that with his hammer Mjolnir. Thor in Danish, thunder is called Torden. So, and this comes from Thor. So, Torden. This is what he does. Baldur, he's the one here on the left, is so noble and pure. He is so bright and beautiful in appearance that it shines from him. He is the wisest, most eloquent, and most merciful of the Aesir, but he has a nature such that none of his commands can be obeyed. He meets a tragic fate, and the myth of Baldur is the most poignant in all of Norse mythology. Loki. Loki is also an Aesir, and he is evil by nature and very capricious in his behavior. Loki has 3 children with a giantess, the Fenrir wolf, the Midgard serpent, and Hel. He also has a nice and loyal wife, Sigyn, in Asgard. As Iliad describes, Loki is an enigmatic and ambiguous god. He belongs to the Aesir, but tries to harm the gods, and at the end of the world he fights against them. But he also fights against the enemies of the gods, the giants. He persuades the dwarfs to forge magical objects for the gods, Odin's ring Draupnir and Thor's hammer Mjolnir, etc. But he's also malicious, immoral, and criminal. And it is he who is responsible for the murder of Baldur, which he boasts about. He puts gods and giants against each other. Now, these are now a little bit about Odin's three terrible children, the Fenrir wolf, the Midgard serpent, and Hel. The Fenrir wolf, the Midgard serpent, and Hel grew up in Valhalla, the home of the Aesir. But the gods heard prophecies about them saying that they would cause great harm and misfortune. At the beginning, the great god Tyr, we haven't heard much about him, he doesn't play such a big role, but he's also a great god, Tyr. He was quite happy with the Fenrir wolf, and he was also the only one who was brave enough to feed it. But the gods became increasingly concerned as it grew larger and larger, and all the omens said that it was destined to harm them. So they therefore decided to bind it. And after several failed attempts, they created a chain from the noise of cats' paws, the beards of women, the roots of mountains, the tendons of bears, the breath of fish, and the saliva of birds. And the wolf became suspicious and said that if it was to be bound, one of the gods must place his hand in his mouth as a pledge. Tyr placed his right hand in the wolf's mouth. Then everyone laughed except Tyr, who lost his hand. This is from Sturluson. The wolf was tied to a huge rock and must remain there until Ragnarok. On the picture you can see now, Tyr is without his hand there. Odin throws the Midgard serpent into the deep sea surrounding the earth, but the beast grows so huge that it encircles the world and bites its own tail, while spewing poison over the sky and the sea. Odin casts Hel into Niflheim, where she presides over the dead. Each of these three characters will have a role to play in Ragnarok. Erland and evil dreams about his life, which he told to the Aesir. So they decided that he should be protected. His mother, Frigg, was promised that fire and water, iron, and all kinds of metal, stones, earth, trees, diseases, animals, birds, poison, and snakes would spare Balder. After that, the Aesir and Balder amused themselves by throwing stones and spears at him, but nothing happened to him. However, Loki didn't like this. So he transformed himself into a woman and asked Frigg, "Have all things sworn to spare Baldur?" And Frigg replied, "There is a small tree growing west of Valhalla. It's called mistletoe. I thought it was too young to be bound by the oath." Loki now persuades Baldur's blind brother Höder to shoot Baldur with an arrow made of mistletoe. With Loki's help, Höder hits his target and Baldur falls dead to the ground. When the gods asked Hel for Baldur to be returned to Asgard, Hel demands that every living thing must mourn him. And messengers are sent around the world to initiate the mourning, and all agree, except for Loki, who had disguised himself as a giantess took. So Baldur has to stay in Hel. Now, the gods were now really angry. So Loki ran away and hid in a mountain, where he built a house with 4 doors so that he can see in all directions. During the day, he often transforms himself into a salmon and hid by the waterfall. But the Aesir managed to catch him, and in the end it was Thor who grabbed his tail and squeezed it. And that is why salmons are so narrow at the back, writes Sturluson. Loki was now bound to a rock in a cave, and a poisonous snake was placed above him so that the snake's venom could drip onto his face. But his faithful wife, Sigyn, holds a bowl under the drops of poison. However, when the bowl is full, she has to empty it, the poison drips down onto his face. This causes him to convulse so violently that the earth shakes. There he lies, bound until Ragnarok. Now, about Ragnarok. With Loki's capture and sentencing, balance is restored within the Aesir. However, the race of giants dwelling in a wilderness that lies beyond the sanctuary of Asgard and the human realm of Midgard have not forgotten Odin's original crime against Ymir. When Odin realizes that the battle between the gods and the giants is drawing nearer year by year, he gathers warriors for his army by stirring divisions between people in Midgard. This is because when the people of Midgard die in battle, they are enlisted in Odin's troops in Valhalla. So Odin, he needs to get more soldiers to be able to beat the giants. So Odin, who has otherwise protected the great heroes, now abandons them because he needs to gather a band of the bravest warriors for the great final battle at Ragnarok. So now comes 3 consecutive winters, the Fimbul winters, with severe frost and strong winds. The sun, who since the beginning has been chased by a wolf, is now swallowed by the wolf, and the other wolf captures the moon, and the stars disappear from the sky. I quote from Sturluson. Then the event will happen that the whole earth and the mountains will shake, so that trees will be uprooted from the ground, mountains will collapse, and all bonds will be broken and worn away. Then Fenrir the wolf is unleashed. Then the sea rushes over the lands, for Midgard's serpent twists in giant rage and seeks land. And Fenrir advances with his jaws wide open, his upper jaw touching the sky, and his lower jaw touching the earth. Flames shoot out of his eyes and nostrils. The Midgard serpent spews poison, spraying it all over the sky and the sea. During this commotion, the sky splits open, and from there ride the sons of Muspel. Surt rides first, and both in front of him and behind him there is burning fire. Muspel's sons advance towards the plain. Then the Fenrir wolf and the Midgard serpent also arrive. Loki has also arrived, along with all the frost giants, while Loki is accompanied by all of Hel's followers. And the Aesir prepare for battle and advance across the plain. Odin rides at the front wearing a golden helmet and magnificent armor. He heads towards the Fenrir wolf. Thor at his side, but he cannot help him. Thor is at his side, but he cannot help him because he's fighting the Midgard serpent and has his hands full. Thor kills the Midgard serpent and then takes 9 steps back. Then he falls dead to the ground from the poison that the serpent spat on him. The wolf swallows Odin. It is his death. But immediately afterwards, Vidar, Odin's son, appears and steps with one foot on the wolf's lower jaw. With one hand, he grabs the wolf's upper jaw and tears it apart, killing the wolf. This is the picture on the right here. We see Vidar killing the wolf. And Loki and Heimdall kill each other. And next, Surt spews fire across the earth and burns the entire world. And after the wildfires have burned the entire world, gigantic floods cause the earth to sink into the sea. But then a new and fresh earth reappears from the sea. An eagle flies over a waterfall, hunting fish on a mountain, and the re-emerged fields grow without needing to be sown. It is a new and cleansed, fertile world. Here I show you the picture on the left is an island that I don't remember when but it rose from the sea. It's called Surtsey. It's from it's an island beside Iceland. And it certainly rose up from the sea. So I chose that picture to sort of illustrate the new world coming up from the sea. And here we have the eagle flying over the waterfall. And there are survivors after Ragnarok. Odin's sons, Vidar and Vali, they're alive. And Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, also survived, and Baldur and his blind brother Herder are finally released by Hel. They become the new gods, but unlike their fathers Odin and Thor, they want to relate to each other in peace and to understand their origins and the world around them. They all sit down and share the mysterious wisdom and talk about events from the past. This is from Sturluson. I quote Sturluson here. They all sit down and share the mysterious wisdom and talk about events from the past, about the Midgard serpent and the Fenrir wolf. And then they find the gold pieces that belong to the Aesir in the grass. And two people hide in the forest. The morning dew is their food. And from these two people descends such a great lineage that the whole world is populated. And another thing you will find surprising is that the sun has begotten a daughter who is no less beautiful than herself, and she will follow in her mother's footsteps. But if you ask further ahead in time, then I don't know where you could have got that from, because I haven't heard anyone talk about the passage of time further ahead, writes Sturluson. So this was the very, very brief version of Ragnarok, because there is a lot of tales around this in this Norse mythology. But now I will reflect on the tensions of opposite and how this myth can sort of illustrate or try to illustrate the polarization that happens. On a concrete level, the myth of Ragnarok is disturbingly close to much of what we see in the world today. The pollution of air, oceans and earth, overfishing, forest fires, floods, and the successive wars in which innocent civilians suffer as their leaders fight against each other. Our Jungian psychology builds on oppositions and creative ways of building bridges between the opposites. C.G. Jung's excellent concept, the transcendent function, describes how the bridge may be built with the help of the symbol, Greek symbolon, throwing together. But when the two sides are kept apart, the gap remains, and the diabol rules, Greek diabalein, which means throwing across, and the two sides remain separate, polarized. So we have on the top of the bridge we have symbol that can bring the two sides together. At the bottom we have diabol that is splitting. The myth cycle starts with a creative tension between the ice-cold Niflheim and the fiery hot Muspelheim. So this is a creative opposition, and from that the whole world is created. The catalyst that starts the conflict between these two polarized oppositions are the hot sparks flying from Muspelheim that melt the ice in Niflheim, thereby creating the living drops from which the giant Ymir and later the cow Audhumbla emerge. Such polarized opposites as these archetypal dynamics described in the Ragnarok myth cycle are rich with creative potential. Jung writes, the confrontation of the two opposites generates a tension charged with energy and creates a living third thing, a living birth that leads to a new level of being, a new situation. The next creative opposition that comes in the Ragnarok story is the battle between the Aesir and the Vanir, and their subsequent reconciliation. The Aesir are responsible for setting boundaries, for law and order, and for war. Their leader Odin's shamanistic talents give him the ability to know what happens between heaven and earth, as well as in the underworld. Here is a picture of Odin on Yggdrasil. By contrast, the Vanir take care of the natural forces, wind, fire, rain, and sunshine, and the earth's crops. They are gods of fertility, love, and reproduction and wealth. In Jungian terms, it is the transcendent function, or the bringing together of the opposites for the production of a third, that eventually brings these two rival families into harmony, allowing for mutual relationship and exchange. As both means and expressions of this mediation, Hörnir, I haven't talked about him before, Hörnir, but he's the sort of the person who has to leave the Aesir and to settle with the Vanir, and Njord, he goes from the Vanir to the Aesir. And later Njord's two children, Frey and Freya, also take up permanent residence with the Aesir. However, with Baldur's death, the opportunity for a stable peace is lost, and Loki plays a central role in this shift from creative conflict resolution to global destruction. Loki is a true trickster, with his powers as a shapeshifter, his dual nature, half animal, half divine, his exposure to all kinds of tortures, which is how Jung defines the trickster. As the story progresses, Loki's malicious sides become increasingly apparent. But for a long time, the gods are able to resolve many and various conflicts. However, threats are mounting, at first in the collective unconscious, and fearing negative prophecies about Loki's 3 terrifying children, the gods try to neutralize these impending risks. At first, it seems that they might have found solutions. They thought they could drown the Midgard serpent, but the Midgard serpent grows so huge that it eventually encircles the earth like a giant Ouroboros, holding the entire world in an increasingly suffocating embrace. The Fenrir wolf also grows gigantic and threatening, so much that eventually the gods are forced to bind it, only to know that it will be unleashed at Ragnarok as predicted. Likewise, the gods' well-intentioned promise to protect Baldur from his own downfall represents an attempt to find a creative solution. Death seems to be overcome, and the gods enjoy their playful games, but Loki does not like to watch these games, and his plot to murder Baldur is a crucial turning point in the story. Baldur and Loki represent shadow sides of each other, and Loki's malicious envy and will for power takes over. By sly tricks, Loki manages to get Baldur killed and banished to the clutches of hell, where he must remain despite the pleas of all except one Loki disguised as Göttuk. By this subterfuge, Loki has crossed the red line, and there is no way back. Reconciliation is no longer possible. Loki is captured and chained, and he only breaks free at Ragnarok, during which he pits himself against his fellow Aesir by forging an alliance with the giants in the final battle. The beginning of Ragnarok starts with 3 years of warfare. After this, it is not the gods, the giants or humans who initiate the violence denouement, but nature itself, in form of the 3 Fimbulwinters, which herald the devouring of the sun and moon, the destruction of the mountains by gigantic earthquakes, and the flooding of the land. All monsters break free from their previous containment, and in the ensuing chaos, almost every living being kills each other. Grönbeck writes, "Now the ash tree Yggdrasil stands trembling, and terror spreads among all creatures above and below. The world's self is threatened, and the prophecy declared at the beginning of the myth seems to be coming true. One day the tree will collapse, marking the end of the world, Ragnarok. We are now beyond any prospect of repair among the first generation of the gods, and yet there is still hope for regeneration among their descendants." Now, I would like to have some theoretical reflections, first from Jung to Freud. In 1912, Sabina Spielrein proposed the idea of a death drive existing along the sexual life force in an article titled "Destruction as the Cause of Coming into Being," which she published in the Yearbook for Psychoanalytic and Psychopathological Researches. In her article, Spielrein quoted her mentor, former analyst, and the yearbook's editor Jung. And she quotes, "Passionate longing," this means the libido, "has 2 aspects. It is the power that beautifies everything and in certain cases destroys everything." Sigmund Freud subsequently adopted Spielrein's idea and developed his signature theory about a dialectic interplay in the psyche between the life force Eros and the death drive. Later, Freud speculated that the interaction and counteraction between the life force and the death drive could explain the phenomena of life. Freud reached the conclusion then that in addition to the drive to preserve the living substance and bring it together in ever larger units, there must be another opposed to it, which sought to break down these units and restore them to their primordial inorganic state. I think that if we think about the changes of the seasons, which is really very much here in Denmark, at least, we have at the beginning we have spring, and also summer is really life force. We have the flowers blooming and the fruits and everything coming up there. But then in the autumn and the winter, it starts to go that the units are starting to break down, and they are going back to their primordial inorganic state to be fertilizers for the new life force in the spring again. So I think this is this circle is when it goes well, when the natural balance between life force and death force. Both Eros and Thanatos, and I have to come back to, I think I will say, because Jung actually, I will come back to that, because Freud himself didn't use the word Thanatos, but everybody puts that now in his theory. So both Eros and Thanatos are Greek gods of love and desire and death, respectively. While Freud frequently used the word, used the word Eros to describe the life force, it doesn't appear that he himself mentioned the word Thanatos during his discussion of the death drive. Nevertheless, he's widely considered to be the originator of these paired psychological concepts. Freud used Eros to describe a drive or an instinct, whereas Jung used the term Eros to describe a principle. And he matched Eros with Logos as its contrasting principle. Jung primarily described Eros and Logos as two different modes of functioning, stating, the concept of Eros could be expressed in modern terms as psychic relatedness, and that of Logos as objective interest. Furthermore, Jung associated Eros with the anima, or the feminine, and Logos with the animus, or the masculine, while making a small reservation. But I do not wish to intend to give these two intuitive concepts too specific a definition, he said. I use Eros and Logos merely as conceptual aids to describe the fact that woman's consciousness is characterized more by the connective quality of Eros than by the discrimination and cognition associated with Logos. In men, Eros, the function of relationship, is usually less developed than Logos. This is according to Jung. In Freudian terms, Eros and Thanatos work together in a healthy psyche or in a healthy society. Eros drives expansion and growth, while Thanatos, in a healthy cooperation with Logos, establishes limitations and provides stability in the formation and strengthening of permanent structures. Freud saw the interplay between the life force and the death drive as crucial to the maintenance of a well-adjusted personality, and we see this psychological truth represented at a collective level in the pact between the Aesir and the Vanir. Similarly, in Jungian terms, Eros and Logos also balance one another to harmonize the personality and the community. However, if Thanatos or Logos prevail instead of cooperating with Eros, a different dynamic emerges, aimed at bringing life under omnipotent control. Destructive forces win out, emotional connection is blocked, and survival instinct becomes the primary mode of existence. We see this dominance of Thanatos at the expense of Eros or Logos in the Ragnarok myth in Loki's psychology and his actions. Here we see how Loki tricks the blind Höder into shooting his brother Baldur and thus causes Baldur's death. In our modern world, it can often feel as if the healthy relationship between Eros and Thanatos is broken, and the destructive power of Thanatos, often allied with Logos, is out of control. Instead of supporting the collective creative potential of Eros in culture, scientific research, new discoveries, and in the care and welfare sector, through regulating mechanisms such as taxes, democratic structures and processes, etc., Thanatos and Logos insist above all else on power, control, and the demand for economic growth. Across the commercial sector, we see Thanatos and Logos at work in the primacy of cost effectiveness and efficiency and the pursuit of shareholder profit. In agriculture and food production, the Eros quality of harmony with nature is overruled by exploitative methods such as factory farming, cruel and inhumane treatment of animals, and widespread use of pesticides. This broken relationship between Eros and Thanatos leads to environmental pollution of earth, water, air, and of destruction of the rainforests, which in turn breaks down natural barriers between animals and humans, resulting in the spread of dangerous viruses, while fossil fuel emissions continue to drive the mounting climate crisis with its ultimate threat of mass extinction. In politics, too, it often seems that Thanatos has taken Eros hostage in the resurgence of fascism, dictatorship, extreme inequality, corruption, closed borders, and the ongoing horror of war. Now I go to reflect on contemporary theory and practice. Despite its ancient roots, the Nordic drama of Ragnarok seems to speak to our contemporary fears with its prophecy of global war and environmental system collapse. Writing in this journal last year, this is a little bit a slip of the tongue because I took this from my article in the journal. But writing in the Journal of Analytical Psychology last year, in an article titled "The Care System and Its Importance in Dealing with Today's Crisis," Verena Kast posed the timely question, can we hope for a paradigm shift? Kast framed that shift as a move away from neoliberal profit-seeking, competitive thinking, from this more and more to an attitude of caring for others and for nature, of mutual recognition and appreciation. Kast presented this caring attitude as generating self-transcendent emotions, which move us away from narcissistic self-reflection toward relationship with others. They bring about a closer connection to fellow human beings, and associated with this is a clearer willingness to help. This can be measured. People feel better because they are connected to something greater, Kast writes. Kast went on to describe our capacity for caring as a gift of Mother Nature. We have it in our biological heritage. It enables us humans as a basic gift to help each other in a large life-serving context and thus also to set a counterweight against destruction. However, in her conclusion, Kast also acknowledged that achieving an attitude of loving care requires a new way of dealing with our own destructiveness. And in the pages of also the Journal of Analytical Psychology in recent years, numerous practitioners have grappled with the question of how to deal with that destructiveness. In 2022, in an article titled "Destructiveness, a Neglected Child in the Theory of Analytical Psychology," Gustav Bovensieben addressed the lacuna in current theory and practice as it relates to destructive forces in the individual and the collective. Bovensieben wrote, "Neither Jung nor psychoanalysts have developed an independent concept of destructiveness per se, and this is what I'm concerned with here, a split-off destructiveness that cannot be integrated into the self. It is surprising that in the face of worldwide individual and collective violence and destructiveness, we have not yet dealt with the cause of destructiveness as an independent characteristic of man beyond either instinct, psychology, a shadow dynamic, or archetypal violence," writes Bovensieben. And when describing the effects of the war on an unprepared population in Ukraine, Irina Semkiv, in her article War, Mentalization and Totalitarian State of Mind, writes how, in response to the destructiveness of this war, a primary system of defenses of the self is activated to preserve its integrity. A totalitarian state of mind caused by fear directs all psychic energy to the eternal world. And Semkiv writes, social objects are divided into good ones and bad ones, those that are different from the self and therefore unpredictable and threatening. As a result of the split, the psyche becomes totalitarian. The dehumanization of bad social objects and the need for their further destruction are demanded. I should say that Semkiv lives in Ukraine. So now Donald Kalsched is among those Jungian clinicians who seek to understand the phenomena of destructive forces or anti-individuation tendencies as they manifest in the consulting room. In his earlier books and papers, Kalsched, when focusing on the psyche of the traumatized child, describes how primitive or dissociative archetypal defenses are established as a result of early failures of attachment and containment. He writes, when other defenses fail, archetypal defenses will go to any length to protect the self, even to the point of killing the host personality. Kalsched sees demonic archetypal defenses as forming a protective shield against an unbearable dread associated with the threatened dissolution of a coherent sense of self. Whereas a healthy child's repeated interactions with stable and secure attachment figures may facilitate Kast's self-transcendent emotions, leading to rewarding connections with others, the traumatized child must rely on the psyche's archetypal self-care system, which subsequently screens all relations with the outer world. And Kalsched writes, once the trauma defense is organized, all relations with the outer world are screened by the self-care system. What was intended to be a defense against further trauma becomes a major resistance to all unguarded, spontaneous expressions of self in the world. The person survives but cannot live creatively. Kalsched describes how this primitive defense cannot be educated. It functions on the magical level of consciousness with the same level of awareness it had when the original trauma or traumas occurred. Each new life opportunity is mistakenly seen as a dangerous threat of re-traumatization and is therefore attacked. In this way, the archaic defenses become anti-life forces. The psyche is in the grip of the archetypal defense mechanisms, in psychological terms named early defenses, and such as control, denial, idealization, demonization, etc., and most important, splitting. The late Swedish psychoanalyst Ludwig Igra, writing in Psychotherapy, Life and Death, conceived of psychological defenses in similar terms to Kalsched. He stated, it seems as if a destructive part of the personality perpetually patrols the border both to other people and to a more infantile, demanding or contact-seeking part of the personality. Igra describes how both the destructive aspect and the demanding or contact-seeking part of the personality have primitive and infantile features which cannot be modified to any significant degree. Here he completely agrees with Kalscheit, or he was before Kalscheit actually. So I don't think they ever read each other because Ikra is not, his book is not translated. He wrote in Swedish, and I don't think it's translated to English. So anyway, but Ikra continued. By virtue of their unconscious and derailed nature, they cannot be integrated as an organic part of the self-organization. On the contrary, they exert their silent influence as unrecognized and alien elements of the personality. Ika also mentions Freud's concept of Eros and Thanatos, how Eros in a healthy psyche ensures expansion and growth, while Thanatos ensures limitation and thus the development of stable and lasting psychological structures when everything is good and everything goes well. But if Thanatos, as Ikra writes, takes Eros hostage, a completely different internal process begins with the aim of bringing life under omnipotent control. Then the inner world continues to be reigned by a diabolic, non-human figure. Thanatos can either be a force that defends or a force that destroys. It depends on whether it is in balance with Eros or it has taken Eros hostage. The danger is when Thanatos tears away from its attachment to Eros and instead captures Eros. Then the psyche becomes more and more barricaded. Earlier Jungians exploring this theme included Erich Neumann, who focused on a rigid distress ego, which barricades itself against the outer world as well as the inner world, and also blocks access to the self. In this way, the self is protected against unbearable feelings, but at great expense, because emotions and spontaneous creative impulses are suppressed. This results in the division of the person in two parts, an armored, barricaded part and an often much more unconscious, perhaps primarily physical, part that is suffering, anxious, and does not feel worthy of love. Most often, the armored part dominates the consciousness. The person will often find it difficult to see the suffering side as part of themselves. Polarization remains. The split can also be present in many different forms of addiction, where regressive mechanisms increase as the addiction takes over. Luigi Sawyer has pointed out that the rite of passage, which brings about the evolvement of a subsequent higher stage from the previous one, runs in reverse in addiction. The drug users has thus reversed the model. Rebirth comes in the first moments of euphoria, then comes death. What happens is not a benign regression in service of the ego, but a pathological regression that leads the addict into the early defense mechanisms, splitting tendencies. In 1961, a few months before his death, Jung had a correspondence with Bill Wilson, one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Jung wrote, "You see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum." We also heard this in the lecture before, also about addiction. There was also references to this. So the huge problem here is the displaced numinosity. It is the drug that carries the numinosity, not the self. The addict has been distanced from his or herself. And this corresponds to also what Kalscheit and Neumann and others say about these regression to the early defense mechanisms that also blocks the access to the self. And there the numinosity is projected to the drug instead. And the drug can be many things, because alcoholism is not the only form of addiction. On the contrary, the list is very long, if you go into that list, and that doesn't even take all the different kinds of addiction. I think I just counted the number of 12-step groups that handle addictive states, and there are 35 in this Wikipedia. But they didn't have fitness freaks anonymous or shopaholics anonymous, and so there were several they didn't have of these that are also groups for those, and it is constantly growing, much more than a physical substance can carry the addictive projection. So here I have, I just put in some pictures where you can, just to illustrate. Here we have, of course, we have medicine. Medicine can create a lot of addiction. That is very well known, especially now. Also, we have this problem with the fentanyl and the oxycodone and this. A lot of problems with that. This is smoking marijuana, but it's also smoking in itself is addictive. And here we have a lot of this is one form of eating disorder, the bulimia, but of course we have the anorexia and overeating also as an addictive. Here we have gambling, and here we have computer games. Here we have cutting, and here we have violence, rape, abuse of children, and here we have also violence in also and heroin. But there are many more than this, of course, and we can say that also our general consumerism, including social media, can be addictive. Or we know it really has tendency to be addictive, and thus reinforce the regressive tendencies towards the early defenses, which I repeat here: control, denial, idealization, demonization, etc., and most important, splitting, polarization. So now I come to the last part, which has to do with managing nature's destruction and destructive forces within ourselves. The myth cycle of Ragnarok is a cautionary tale of living with nature, living with each other, and living with ourselves. At the level of individual psychology, it describes a development from the original tension of opposites to a creative conflict solution, followed by polarization and total destruction. The final battle sequence at Ragnarok represents a regression to early defense mechanisms where the symbolic function has stopped working and all creative progress is blocked. You remember I referred to the transcendent function where we had the two oppositions, and the thing that can build the bridge is the symbol. If you don't have the symbolic function, if that breaks down, then instead you have diabol. Then you have the diabolic, which is the split. It cannot meet. Life with all its many possibilities for development is halted by rigid defenders, destructiveness, and ultimately death. Thanatos asserts itself in a large-staged survival attempt, paradoxically often with life itself at stake. And at times like these, a mediation between the opposites fail. When breakdown or a rigid defensiveness arises through a conflict of opposites with too great pressure on the system and with no means of synthesis. This is an article by Hester Solomon that is from the Congress proceedings from the 1992 Congress, which had the overall title, The Transcendent Function. In this Congress proceedings, you find quite some material about the transcendent function, which in my mind is one of the most important theoretical concepts by Jung. Of course, not the only, but this is very important, the transcendent function. And when she writes about a personality, but she says also similar dynamics can emerge at the collective level. Now, if we go to this, the state we are in, the period we are in now, there is quite a lot of eschatological fears, and it is typical for eschatological fears about the world's destruction to flourish in times of cultural and political crisis. But unlike the Christian deluge, which God unleashes as punishment for the corrupt state of mankind, the flood in the Nordic mythology is something that is predestined to happen. This is very interesting. Also, Iliad writes about it, especially he says it's characteristic that the end of the world is already heralded in the cosmology itself. Iliad writes that. The old world will perish in total and cruel destruction, and it cannot be transformed by any living creature, which we referred to the quote from Bovensiepen. As I also said in the course of the Ragnarok, it's not it's nature that takes over. It's not the humans cannot stop it. It has gone over. It's tipped some. So it now nature took over. So instead, Thanatos takes over, and Thanatos here, and nature reacts. And yet the subsequent resurrection of a fertile new world is also brought about by nature itself. So it's nature. The world rises again from the sea, and the fields have sown themselves, and then the world is populated by the new few survivors who are not interested in war and destruction, but in talking to each other, remembering their mystical wisdom and understanding their past. So there is also a hope in this. However, with its mystical primordial landscapes of Niflheim, Muspelheim, and the Ginnungagap, Ragnarok reminds us that our planet has transformed itself again and again. Life on Earth has survived volcanic eruptions, meteor strikes, and mass extinctions during billions of years of evolution. But this has all been nature itself. It has been meteors coming. Now we face systemic man-made environmental changes that threaten our own survival and jeopardize nature's ability to heal itself. This is probably the first time that it is man that causes all these changes, not nature itself. As Jungians, we must do what we can to support ourselves, our communities, and our patients to maintain an Eros position of loving and caring connection with each other and with nature in the face of that terrifying threat. Part of that work involves facing and containing the tension of opposites and the forces of destruction within ourselves, as Kast, Bovensiepen, Kalshed, and others set out. So thank you very much for this. This is the end of my presentation now. So
Thank you very much, Ms. Berg, for your insightful and timely lecture. Your reflections on Ragnarok and the archetypal tensions of Eros, Thanatos, and Logos resonate deeply with the challenges of our times and also point us to the possibility of rebirth and renewal. Meanwhile, as we wait for questions, maybe I can put forward a question of mine.
sure, please.
Yeah. So as we pass through this lecture, so the birth then it leads to let's say destruction, which is the Thanatos, and then again there's a rebirth, right? So is this a continuous process, like in a cyclic form, or is that a linear process? Is there an eternal end?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a cyclic process. I think that's also what, but there is a debate about this actually. I've read quite a lot of literature, and some some authors are not happy with the resurrection, and they claim that that this has to do with Snorri Sturluson, the author of the Edda, that he was christened. He was both a historian, but he was also christened, and he had to balance between his Christian views and the pagan views, the Norse mythology views. So some authors claim that it is a construction by him, but I'm not so sure. I don't think so. This is not my belief. For me, it makes a lot of sense, and it also makes a lot of sense what happens after because they're all so violent and they really terrible. And then after that, their sons, their sons, they survive, and they are more they're more modest. They sort of learned something from this, it seems. So this is what we could hope also these days, because I don't think I'm not sure what will happen now, but I think we are not in a good place at the moment. I'm not sure it's the wars that I'm more worried about the climate, I must say, but we will see.
We'll see. All right. Thank you. Thank
I
you
can
so
see
much.
that there is a question. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Miss Reshma, you can put forward your question.
I didn't have so much as a question as maybe some thoughts. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. It really brought alive what we're facing today, and I just loved that the mythology reflected the land so much with the earthquakes and the fire and the ice, and it is so driven by consciousness of the environment that's found where it was born. The thoughts that came up for me as I listened is just the similarities between the mythology you spoke about and the mythology we have in India with our Hindu myths. The sacred, the cow of plenty, Kamadhenu, the sacred tree of Kalpariksha, and also our sense of time, which is cyclical. Uh, Kala, which is time, is not linear, it's cyclical, and there's a perpetual cycle of creation and dissolution. And the seeds of it are contained in the other. So creation contains destruction, and destruction contains rebirth. It's part of the same process, and each cycle is called a yuga. And right now we are, according to myth, in a yuga which is a complete degeneration. While there is higher consciousness, there's also a complete degeneration. And Shiva and Kali are the forces that are associated with the downward cycle, where they destroy what needs to die in order for new life to begin. And I guess sorry, this is taking so long. I was just
it's fine. It's so interesting. It's so interesting.
Yeah. My question or thought was, I don't know if it's so much a question, for us, Kali, who is the epitome of time, the destructiveness and the creative potential of time. She is a divine feminine, and the consort of the masculine. But she brings the masculine. He's inert until she arrives, and then he becomes active. I was just wondering what your thoughts were about how the divine feminine has anything to say to us in this era of destruction, and also to bring it back to the personal psychology of trauma, the principle of the sacred feminine. If you could speak to that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think it's really, really interesting. I would like to say something first, because the Nordic mythology has its roots in Indo-European mythology, and it didn't travel. It sort of the line spread. So some went to Greece and Rome, and some went up north. So and past, and so therefore there are also some traits from the Greek gods. Also there are some similarities with the Greek gods, but not. But also there is the origin that's really interesting. I think that there is some family there, but also with Indian mythology, I think that's really interesting what you say, because I don't know so much about Indian mythology. I just heard about this with the different ages. I know there are also ages in Nordic mythology. I haven't gone into that so much, but I think this is very. I heard that recently with that we are now in a dark age, according to Indian mythology, which I find is really interesting. What you bring up about the female, the feminine, is really interesting because um, this um, actually it's also the Nordic mythology is quite patriarchal, and like the Greek mythology became more patriarchal. Um, at the beginning, we had also more female, strong female gods in Greek mythology, but then after Zeus grew up and he swallowed the wise before he grew up, there was the wisest person was a woman called Metis in Greek mythology, but Zeus he swallowed her, and then when he raped her first, so she became pregnant. Then he swallowed her, and then he gave birth to Athena, which is the loyal feminine. She's the loyal woman to the men. So the Nordic mythology is very much, and the Greek mythology is very patriarchal. And I think we really miss this more powerful female. My good friend and colleague Pia Skogemann, she has worked a lot with the old goddess Inanna, the old Sumeric goddess Inanna, who was very powerful and also very independent, and also quite very strong, and both and very feminine at the same time, as she was really she killed everybody, and she killed a lot of people, and so she was also brutal, but she was also very feminine. So I think it's very interesting. I would like to go much more into the character of Kali. I don't know much about her, I must say. I think I mostly read. I'm a little bit embarrassed, but I read a book when I was very young called what was it called, the Desire of Kali. That was about India. So this is and this. I was very young when I read this. I read a lot of books about India. I found them very interesting, but they were quite a little bit, maybe a little bit romantic or popular books like that. So I would really like to go much more into Kali. I find her really interesting figure, and I think this was also something that Jung was asking for. Jung was very critical towards the Christian God, because he said he's much too pure. He liked better the older God, who was more who was both good and evil. That's what he also writes in the answer to Job. And I think also it seems that Kali has much more both sides in her, as far as I understand. So thank you very much for that question. I find it really interesting, and would like to go more into that. Yeah, thank you. Maybe my bigger connection to Delhi now can give me some. I can get some more from that. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do we have more questions? I guess not.
It
So
seems that.
it seems. So we'll move forward. Once again, thank you so much, Ms. Berg, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you all. The lecture is hereby concluded. We will now